What if the reason your days keep feeling chaotic has nothing to do with your schedule, and everything to do with the state of your mind before the day even begins? Picture a glass of water sitting perfectly still, clear, calm, transparent enough that you can see every detail resting at the bottom. Nothing distorted, nothing hidden. Now imagine someone walking by and bumping the table. In an instant, the water shakes. It turns cloudy. It swirls so fast that you cannot see through it anymore. The bottom disappears. The details vanish. For a moment, all you can see is motion and confusion. That glass of water is your mind every single morning. Something bumps the table. An alarm. A message. A thought. A memory from last night. A worry about what is waiting for you. And suddenly, everything inside you is already moving before you have even stood up. Your mind is racing, your emotions are reacting, and you are trying to make decisions, speak kindly, and think clearly through water that has not had even 1 second to settle. This is not weakness. It is not a personality flaw. It is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is simply what happens when the mind is disturbed before it becomes still. And long before modern psychology gave people new words for stress, patterns, and mindset, the Stoics already understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the private reflections we now call meditations that the first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit, and the second is to look things in the face and see them for what they are. That order matters. Still the water first, then look. Not the other way around. Because this is what almost no one tells you about reacting quickly. Speed is not strength. A fast reaction is not the same thing as a wise one. Snapping back in 2 seconds does not make you powerful. It just means the disturbance took control before your stillness had a chance to speak. The people you admire for their calm presence, the ones who never seem rattled, who say the right thing at the right time, who walk into tense situations and somehow make them feel smaller, are not made of different material than you are. They are not blessed with some rare personality trait that you missed out on. They simply learned one skill most people never practice. They let the water settle before they look through it. That is the practice. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is what we are building together. 9 Stoic principles that help you still the water every morning before the day has a chance to shake you. Before the noise begins. Before the reactive version of you grabs the microphone. Before the thoughtful version of you has even entered the room. And every principle builds on the one before it. So do not rush this. Do not skip ahead in your mind. The calm you are looking for is not something waiting at the end of the video like a reward. It begins the moment you decide to slow down and stay with the process. So now, let the water settle. If you are ready to protect your peace today, say it clearly in your own mind. I pause. I breathe. I choose peace. Let's begin with the first principle. The morning is not just a time. It is a choice. Most people think of morning as a block on the clock, a routine, a rushed transition between sleep and responsibility. But the Stoics saw it differently. They understood that the morning does not simply begin your day. It sets the tone for it. It decides which version of you will lead. Richard Whately once said, "Lose an hour in the morning, and you will spend all day looking for it." And that is more than a productivity quote. It is a psychological truth. Because the way you begin shapes the way you perceive. And the way you perceive shapes the way you respond. The Stoics were deeply intentional about this. They did not stumble blindly into the day and hope to handle whatever showed up. They prepared themselves inwardly before the world made its demands outwardly. Epictetus taught that one of the most important disciplines in life was learning to govern what the Greeks called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. The inner part of you that interprets events, assigns meaning, and decides how you will respond. That part of you is especially vulnerable in the morning. You are not fully awake yet. Your guard is lower. Your emotional patterns are closer to the surface. You are more impressionable, more suggestible, more easily pulled into someone else's urgency, someone else's mood, someone else's chaos. And that is exactly why what you do first matters so much. What you listen to first matters. What you allow into your awareness first matters. Think about the difference between these two mornings. In the first, you wake up and immediately grab your phone. Messages, headlines, notifications, opinions, stress, comparison. Before your feet even touch the ground, your attention belongs to the world. In the second, you wake up and sit quietly for just 5 minutes. No elaborate ritual. No performance. Just stillness. You notice the room. You notice the light. You notice your breathing. You allow yourself to arrive before the world starts making requests. One of those mornings turns you into a passenger. The other makes you the driver. That is why the Stoic morning was never accidental. It was a form of preparation, a quiet act of leadership over the self. Not dramatic, not complicated, just intentional. And that intention begins before the day ever asks anything from you. And here's the part most people overlook, the part that quietly shapes everything that follows. In those first moments after you wake up, you are not fully yourself yet. Your mind is still soft, still forming. Your defenses are low. Your emotional patterns are right there on the surface, ready to take control before you've even had a say in the matter. That's why what you do first matters more than almost anything else in your entire day. Not what you do later. Not what you plan. What you do first. Think about this for a second. You wake up, reach for your phone, and within seconds you're pulled into emails, headlines, messages, other people's opinions, other people's problems. Your nervous system spikes before your feet even touch the ground. You didn't choose your state. It was chosen for you. Now imagine something different. You wake up, and instead of reacting, you pause. You sit quietly for 5 minutes. No pressure. No formal meditation. Just stillness. You notice the light in the room. You notice your breath. You let your body catch up with your awareness. You give your mind a moment to settle before the world starts making demands. This is where Stoicism becomes incredibly practical. The morning practice wasn't complicated. It wasn't some long ritual reserved for monks or philosophers. At its core, it was something simple but powerful. It began with what the Stoics called premeditatio. Not worry, not overthinking, not spiraling into everything that could go wrong. Just a clear, honest preview of the day ahead. What might challenge me today? Where might I lose my patience? When could I be tempted to react in a way I'll regret? And more importantly, who do I want to be when those moments arrive? This is not pessimism. It's preparation. And those two things are very different. Because when you prepare your mind, you don't get caught off guard. You don't get dragged into reactions you didn't choose. You recognize the moment when it comes, and you meet it with awareness instead of impulse. And here's something most people never consider. What you put into the first 10 to 15 minutes of your morning can set the emotional ceiling for your entire day. If you begin in chaos, you will spend the rest of the day trying to recover. If you begin in clarity, you carry that clarity with you into everything that follows. So try this tomorrow. Before you touch your phone, before you check anything, ask yourself one simple question. What do I want to protect today? Maybe it's your patience, especially with people you care about. Maybe it's your focus in a world designed to distract you. Maybe it's a relationship that's been strained, where you know you've been reacting instead of listening. Whatever it is, name it. And once you name it, treat it like something fragile, something valuable, something worth guarding. Carry it with you throughout the day. That is a Stoic morning. Not dramatic, not complicated, just intentional. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is where real change begins. Not in big breakthroughs, but in small decisions repeated daily. So if you're serious about changing how your days feel, it starts here. My morning, my intention, my day. Now let's take it one step deeper. Because even if you master your morning routine, there's something even more powerful happening underneath it all, your inner narrative. Marcus Aurelius said it clearly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But most people live as if the opposite were true. They believe their thoughts just happen to them, like the weather, like traffic, like something they have no control over. A thought appears, and they accept it as truth without question. But the Stoics challenged that idea completely. They didn't say your thoughts are always wrong. They said something far more precise. Your thoughts are not facts. And the stories you build from those thoughts are not reality. They are interpretations. And interpretations can be examined. They can be questioned. And if necessary, they can be changed. The Stoics call this working with fantasia, the automatic mental impressions that rise up the moment something happens. You get a short text from someone you care about, and instantly your mind says, "They're upset with me." You miss a deadline, and the thought appears, "I'm failing." A friend cancels plans, and suddenly it feels like, "I don't matter." And here's the dangerous part. Those thoughts feel true. They feel immediate, obvious, certain. But Marcus Aurelius trained himself to pause and ask a different question. Is this actually true? Or is this just the first story my mind grabbed onto? That question changes everything. Because it creates space between what happened and what you believe about what happened. And that space is where your freedom lives. Especially in the morning. Because before your day even begins, your mind is already writing a script. It's telling you how the day will go. Whether you can handle it. Whether people will support you or disappoint you. Whether you're ready or already behind. And most of that story runs completely unchecked. But imagine sitting for just a few minutes and noticing it. Not judging it. Not forcing positivity. Just seeing it clearly. What story am I already telling myself about today? Because you cannot question a story you don't even realize you're telling. And once you see it, you have a choice. You can keep repeating it. Or you can step back and decide whether it actually deserves to guide your day. And this is where things get even more powerful, because before your day has even truly begun, something is already shaping everything that follows, your inner narrative. In those first quiet minutes of the morning, before your first conversation, before your first task, before the world even touches you, your mind is already telling a story. A story about how this day is going to unfold. A story about whether you can handle what's ahead. A story about whether people will support you or disappoint you. A story about whether you should take it easy or push harder than you want to. You didn't consciously choose it. You didn't question it. It just appeared, and you accepted it. That's where the Stoics offer something quietly radical. They practice something called reflection, often at the end of the day. But this practice is just as powerful, maybe even more powerful, when you bring it into the morning. Because instead of reviewing your reactions after the damage is done, you begin shaping your awareness before anything happens. So here's what that looks like in real life. You sit for just a few minutes. Not long. Not complicated. And you ask yourself one simple question. What story am I already telling myself about today? Not to judge it. Not to force yourself into fake positivity. Not to replace it with some motivational phrase that doesn't feel real. Just to see it. Because you cannot question something you don't see. And there's something deeply freeing about that moment of awareness. In a world that constantly tells you to feel your feelings, but rarely asks you to examine the meaning you attach to them, this practice gives you a different path. Not suppressing. Not ignoring. But understanding. You begin to notice that the story your mind is telling you might not be helping you at all. It might not be protecting you. It might not even be true. It might simply be familiar. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Epictetus said it clearly. People are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments they place on those events. The event is neutral. The judgment is yours. And if the judgment is yours, then the suffering attached to it can be worked with. It's not fixed. It's not permanent. It's something you can step back from and reshape. So tomorrow morning, before the noise begins, before your phone pulls you in, before your mind starts racing, take a moment and notice. What story is already playing? And then ask yourself something simple but powerful. Is this story actually true, or is it just familiar? Because sometimes they are the same. But very often, they are not. And learning to tell the difference, that is a kind of freedom that no circumstance, no person, no situation can take away from you. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is where real control begins. Not by controlling the world, but by understanding the lens through which you see it. If you stop letting your first thought dictate your entire day, everything changes. My story does not control me. Now let's take this even further. Because once you begin to question your inner narrative, the next step is learning how to truly listen. Not just hear, but listen. Epictetus said something that sounds simple, but carries enormous depth. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. At first, that sounds like basic advice. But it's not. Because hearing and listening are not the same thing. Hearing is automatic. Sound enters your ears. Your brain registers it. You move on. Listening is intentional. It requires effort. It requires presence. It means paying attention not just to the words someone says, but to the meaning behind them, the emotion underneath them, and sometimes even what is left unsaid. And Stoicism asks you to take that skill one step further. To listen not only to other people, but to yourself. To notice the stories forming in your mind before you have enough information to justify them. Because this pattern shows up everywhere. A partner speaks in a slightly different tone, and instantly your mind says, "They're upset with me." A coworker doesn't reply to your message, and suddenly it becomes, "They don't respect me." Your boss overlooks you in a meeting, and within seconds you built a full narrative. "I've done something wrong. I'm not valued." Or maybe the opposite story appears. "They're being unfair. They're threatened by me. This situation is impossible." Both stories can feel completely real. And both can be completely wrong. The Stoics call this fantasia, the mental impression that appears the moment something happens. And they were very clear about one thing. Just because something feels true does not make it true. Under stress, your mind fills in the gaps. It creates meaning where there may not be any yet. And if you don't pause to question it, you end up reacting not to reality, but to your interpretation of reality. And that's where so much unnecessary conflict, frustration, and emotional exhaustion comes from. Not from what actually happened, but from the story built in a matter of seconds. So the practice becomes this. Slow down just enough to ask, am I responding to what actually happened, or to the story I created about it? Because that question alone has the power to stop arguments before they begin, to dissolve misunderstandings before they grow, and to give you back control over your reactions. Listening first is not weakness. It is discipline. It is awareness. And it is one of the most powerful skills you can develop if you want to move through life with clarity instead of constant reaction. I listen first. And this is where the practice becomes real, because listening first is not just about staying quiet. It's about creating enough space to question your own reaction before it takes control. Listening first means pausing long enough to ask yourself something most people never stop to consider. Am I reacting to what actually happened, or to the story I built in a matter of seconds? Because that gap, that tiny space between the event and your interpretation, is where everything changes. This becomes especially important in relationships. Think about how many arguments don't actually start from what was said, but from what was assumed. A tone feels slightly off. A message sounds shorter than usual. A look is misunderstood. And suddenly, a full narrative is created. They're upset. They don't care. They're disrespecting me. But what if none of that was ever true? What if the other person had no idea the story you just built even existed? This is why so many conflicts that seem small on the surface become something much bigger, because they are not really about the situation. They are about the meaning we assign to it without checking if that meaning was accurate. So here is one of the most powerful practices you can carry into your morning and into your day. The next time you feel yourself reacting to someone, pause. Not for long, just long enough. And ask yourself two simple questions. What am I actually hearing? And am I absolutely sure that's what they meant? That question alone can stop arguments before they even begin. It can dissolve tension that would have lasted for days. It can protect relationships that would otherwise slowly wear down from repeated misunderstandings. Because in that pause, you shift from reacting to interpreting, and then from interpreting to understanding. That is the difference between being controlled by your emotions and actually leading them. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is the kind of awareness that builds real strength. Not loud reactions, not quick comebacks, but quiet control. I listen first. Always. Now let's move into something even more challenging, something that affects almost every part of modern life: noise. The Stoics spoke about this long before the world became what it is today, but their insight feels more relevant now than ever. Seneca once said, "If a man knows not which port he sails, no wind is favorable." And if you think about it, that perfectly describes the world we live in. We are surrounded by noise. Not just physical noise, but mental noise. Endless information, notifications, opinions, urgencies competing for your attention every second. Everything feels important. Everything feels immediate. Everything tries to pull you away from your center. And the problem is not that noise exists. The problem is that without direction you follow it. The Stoics understood something simple but powerful. Before you can filter out the noise, you have to know where you are going. Not in vague terms like, "I want to be successful," or "I want to be happy," but in something much more grounded. What kind of person do I want to be today? What is one conversation I've been avoiding that I know matters? What is one action that, if I complete it, would make this day meaningful? When you know your direction, the noise doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority over you. You still hear it. You still notice it. But you don't have to follow it. And this is where a simple morning practice becomes incredibly powerful. Not journaling pages and pages. Not building complex systems. Just writing a few clear sentences before your day begins. Today, what matters most is this. When I get distracted, I will return to this. When something pulls my attention, I will ask, does this move me closer to what matters or further away? That's it. 3 or 4 lines. But those lines become your compass. Because no matter how chaotic the day becomes, you always have something to come back to. And the noise will come. It always does. But now, it no longer decides your direction. You do. I know my direction. Noise means nothing. And now we come to one of the hardest parts of all: anger. because this is where everything you've learned gets tested. Marcus Aurelius once said that anger is like an acid. It harms the container that holds it more than the thing it is poured onto. And if you've ever held onto anger for hours or days, you already know how true that is. The problem is, anger doesn't feel wrong when it shows up. It feels justified. It feels powerful. It feels like the only reasonable response. But most of the time, what we call anger is not clarity. It's a reaction, a surge, a moment where the body moves faster than the mind. And the Stoics didn't say to suppress that feeling. They understood that the first wave, the initial reaction, is natural. It's human. But what they taught is this: what you do after that feeling appears is always a choice. And that changes everything. Because it means anger is not something that controls you. It is something you can choose whether or not to act on. And that choice begins in the same place everything else begins. In the pause. And this is where the real test begins, because anger doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives with certainty. When it rises in you, it feels right. It feels justified. It feels like self-respect, like standing your ground, like the only reasonable response to what just happened. In that moment, it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like truth. And to be clear, sometimes a firm response is necessary. Sometimes a clear boundary is healthy. Sometimes saying no without apology is exactly what the situation requires. But that's not what most anger looks like in everyday life. Most of the time, what we call anger is something else entirely. It's a surge, a spike, a biological reaction. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tighten. Your breathing changes. Your body enters a threat response before your thinking mind has had a chance to catch up. And in that state, you say things you didn't mean. You react in ways you wouldn't choose if you had just a few more seconds. And in those few seconds, something important often gets damaged. A relationship. A moment of trust. Something that took weeks, months, sometimes even years to build, can be shaken in less than half a minute. The Stoics understood this deeply. But they didn't tell people to suppress anger. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings about Stoicism. They didn't say, "Don't feel." They said something much more precise and much more useful. Anger as a feeling may not be in your control. But anger as an action always is. The feeling can arrive without permission. That first surge, that heat, that tension in your chest, that is not a failure. That is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Marcus Aurelius called these first movements. They are automatic. But what happens next? That's where character lives. Because after that first movement, there is a choice. Do you let it speak? Do you let it decide? Or do you pause long enough to bring your thinking mind back into the conversation? Marcus Aurelius trained himself in a way that might seem counterintuitive at first. When he felt anger rising, he didn't ask, "Is this justified?" He asked something far more revealing. What am I actually afraid of right now? Because if you follow anger back to its root, If you strip away the intensity and look at it honestly, you will almost always find something underneath it. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being disrespected. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of being wrong. Fear that something important is slipping out of your hands. And once you see that, anger starts to change shape. It stops looking like power and starts looking like a signal, a message, something trying to tell you that something inside you feels threatened. And signals are not meant to be exploded outward. They are meant to be understood. So the next time you feel that heat rising, don't treat it like something you have to fight or suppress. Don't perform calm. Don't pretend you're unaffected. Instead, pause and ask yourself one honest question. What am I afraid of right now? Then wait. Because the answer that comes up might surprise you. It might be more vulnerable than you expect. But it will also be more useful than anything anger would have pushed you to say in that moment. This is where real control begins. Not in pretending you don't feel, but in choosing what you do with what you feel. I feel it. I don't follow it. And now we move into something even deeper, something that very few people ever truly practice. Listening, not to the world, but to yourself. There is an ancient phrase, carved into the temple of Apollo, later embraced by the Stoics, that says simply, know yourself. And that sounds simple, almost obvious, until you realize how rarely it actually happens. Because most people are not listening to themselves. They are listening to the loudest voice in their head, the reactive one, the one that comments on everything, judges everything, rushes to conclusions, and fills every silence with noise. But underneath that voice, there is another one. Quieter. Slower. More honest. It's the voice that notices when something feels off, even if you can't explain it yet. It's the voice that warns you before you say something you'll regret. It's the voice that tells you, gently but clearly, that you haven't been honest with yourself about something important. The Stoics practice something called self-observation, watching yourself from a slight distance, not with harsh judgment, not with criticism, but with the same patience and clarity you would offer to someone you genuinely care about. Because there's a difference between criticizing yourself and understanding yourself. One shuts you down. The other opens you up. When you begin to listen to that quieter voice, you stop being surprised by your own reactions. You begin to see patterns. You begin to understand what triggers you, what drains you, what matters to you. And that understanding creates something incredibly powerful. Stability. Not the forced calm of holding everything in, but the real calm of knowing yourself well enough that you are no longer constantly reacting to everything around you. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is the kind of strength that lasts. Not control over the world, but clarity within yourself. I know myself. I trust myself. And this is where many people get it wrong, because they confuse self-awareness with self-criticism. Those two are not the same. Self-criticism is loud. It's harsh. It speaks in absolutes. It sounds like, I always mess this up. I'm too sensitive. I'm not disciplined enough. That voice doesn't guide you. It doesn't teach you. It doesn't help you grow. It simply punishes you. And over time, that kind of voice doesn't make you stronger. It makes you more reactive, more defensive, more disconnected from yourself. Self-attention is something completely different. It's quieter. It's more curious. It asks questions instead of making accusations. Instead of saying, I'm the problem, it says, I notice something is off. What's going on underneath? Maybe you've been more irritable for a few days. Instead of judging it, you pause and look closer. Am I exhausted? Have I been pushing too hard? Am I avoiding something I don't want to face? Has something shifted in a relationship or a responsibility that I haven't acknowledged yet? That kind of awareness doesn't tear you down. It gives you information. And once you have information, you have the ability to respond instead of react. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. At the end of each day, he would write. Not long entries. Not perfect reflections. Just honest observations. Where did I show up as my best self today? And where did I fall short? Not as a form of judgment, but as a form of attention. Because the goal was never perfection. The goal was awareness. And over time, that simple habit builds something incredibly powerful. The Stoics called it equanimity. Not the forced calm of someone holding everything in, not the tension of someone trying to appear composed, but a real, grounded steadiness. The kind that comes from knowing yourself so well that your reactions no longer surprise you. You begin to see your patterns before they take over. You begin to recognize your triggers before they escalate. And most importantly, you begin to trust yourself. Because you're actually listening. And this is something that cannot be skipped. You cannot truly listen to the world around you if you are not listening to yourself at all. These practices work together. Each one supports the other. And without self-awareness, everything else becomes surface level. Most people go through life reacting, adjusting, pushing forward, without ever really understanding themselves. But when you begin to pay attention, even in small ways, everything starts to change. I know myself. I trust myself. And now we move into one of the most misunderstood practices in all of Stoicism, something that at first sounds heavy, but is actually one of the most liberating tools you can use in the morning. The Stoics repeated two simple words to themselves every day. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. At first, that can feel uncomfortable, even dark. It can sound like something meant to create fear or anxiety. But that was never the intention. In reality, it does the opposite. It clears away the noise. When you truly sit with the idea, even for a few minutes, something shifts. The things that felt urgent yesterday start to lose their grip. The small frustrations begin to look smaller. The grudges you've been carrying start to feel heavy and unnecessary. And the things that actually matter become clearer. The conversation you've been avoiding suddenly feels important. The people in your life feel more valuable. Your time feels more real. Because here's a simple truth. If you knew, not in a dramatic or frightening way, but in a clear and honest way, that this could be your last morning, what would you do differently? Would you still spend your first 20 minutes replaying something someone said? Would you let traffic ruin your mood? Would you carry irritation into every interaction? Probably not. And that's the point. Memento mori is not about fear. It's about clarity. It reminds you that your time, your attention, your energy, your reactions, all of it is limited. And because it's limited, it's valuable. Epictetus understood this at the deepest level. He lived as a slave, with almost no control over his external circumstances. And yet, those who learned from him described him as one of the freest men they had ever met. Why? Because he understood something that cannot be taken from you. Your response. Your inner state. Your ability to choose how you meet what happens. That is your freedom. And when you bring that awareness into your morning, even gently, it changes how you move through the day. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter. You stop reacting to everything that tries to pull you off course. You become more intentional with where your attention goes. So before you even get out of bed, let this sit with you for a moment. What actually matters today? What deserves my attention? And just as importantly, what doesn't deserve my reaction? Because the way you answer those questions will shape everything that follows. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is what it means to live awake. Not perfectly, but consciously. Today matters. If today is the day you decide to stop wasting your energy on things that don't truly matter, then this is where everything begins to shift. Not in some dramatic, overnight transformation, but in a quiet decision. A decision to stop reacting to everything and start choosing what actually deserves your attention. Today matters, and how you spend your energy matters even more. Because here's something most people don't realize. A lot of reactivity, a lot of the reason people struggle to pause, to listen, to stay grounded, has very little to do with the moment itself. It has to do with something deeper. It has to do with a life that feels fragile. A sense of self that constantly needs to be protected, defended, validated. When your identity is built around being right, every disagreement feels like a personal attack. When your sense of worth is tied to productivity, even a small delay feels like failure. When your emotional stability depends on how others treat you, every unclear message, every silence, every shift in tone becomes something you have to analyze, decode, and defend against. And that is exhausting. The Stoics had a name for this pattern. They called it being enslaved to externals, things outside your control. And the more your peace depends on those things, the more unstable your inner world becomes. More anxious, more reactive, more easily shaken. But the Stoics didn't suggest becoming cold or detached from life. They weren't teaching you to stop caring. They were teaching you something far more powerful. They were teaching you to become rooted. To build an inner foundation strong enough that the world can move around you without moving you. You can feel disappointment without falling into despair. You can feel frustration without becoming hostile. You can feel love without becoming dependent. This is what Epictetus pointed to when he spoke about prohairesis, your faculty of choice. The one thing that is always yours. Everything else can be taken. Your status, your possessions, your reputation, even your freedom, but not your ability to choose how you respond. And when you begin to build your life around that, everything changes. You stop defining yourself by outcomes. You stop tying your identity to things you can't control. You stop feeling like you have to defend yourself in every situation. And instead, you gain something much more valuable. Space. The ability to listen. The ability to wait. The ability to respond without being constantly on edge. This doesn't happen overnight. It's not something you master in a week. But it is a direction. And even the first steps toward it bring relief. So start small. Look at your life right now and ask yourself, what is one thing I'm holding too tightly? One expectation? One outcome? One external thing that I've quietly decided I need in order to feel okay? And then ask, what would it feel like to loosen my grip just a little? Not to stop caring, but to stop clinging. Because that shift, as small as it seems, is where real stability begins. It's quiet, it's internal, and it changes everything. I am rooted. Nothing can shake me. And now, let's bring everything together into something real. Because ideas alone don't change anything. Practice does. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, once said that well-being is achieved little by little, and yet it is no small thing. That's the truth of this entire philosophy. It's not about grand gestures. It's about small, repeated choices. So what does this actually look like in real life? Imagine someone like David. He has a demanding job, a family, responsibilities pulling him in every direction. His mornings used to look like this. The alarm goes off. He reaches for his phone immediately. Emails, news, messages. His stress spikes before he even gets out of bed. By breakfast, he's already short-tempered. By the time he arrives at work, he feels behind, pressured, reactive. Nothing dramatic happened. But everything feels heavy. And then he makes a small change. Not a complete life overhaul. Not a 2-hour morning routine. Just 15 minutes. He wakes up 5 minutes earlier than usual. He sits on the edge of his bed. No phone. No noise. Just a breath. He asks himself one question. What do I want to protect today? And the answer is simple. His patience with his kids. That's it. He doesn't overthink it. He doesn't build a system around it. He just names it. And carries it with him into the day. The emails still come. The traffic is still there. The pressures don't disappear. But something inside him is different. He is no longer reacting to everything. He is remembering what matters. And that changes everything. And that small shift continues to follow him into the rest of his day. Before leaving the house, he thinks briefly about a conversation at work he's been avoiding. He doesn't overthink it. He doesn't rehearse every possible outcome. He simply acknowledges it. Today, I'll need the pause. That's all. No pressure. Just awareness. Then he reads something short. Not a flood of news. Not social media. Not someone else's urgency. Just a single paragraph. Sometimes from meditations, sometimes something he wrote the night before. A reminder. A direction. Something steady he can carry with him. And then, he steps into the same life. The same emails show up. The same passive-aggressive message from a coworker still lands in his inbox. The same traffic still slows everything down. Nothing on the outside has changed. But something on the inside has. It's not the situation. It's the posture. Because when that frustrating message arrives, something new happens. There's a pause. A moment that didn't exist before. Instead of reacting instantly, he notices the reaction rising. And in that moment, he asks himself quietly, almost automatically now, does this deserve my peace today? And that question changes everything. Sometimes the answer is yes. Some things do matter. Some things require attention. But many things don't. Many things only feel important because they triggered something automatic. And whether the answer is yes or no, the question itself creates space. And in that space, his better self has time to show up. This is not transformation through motivation. It's not a sudden breakthrough. It's transformation through repetition. Through choosing, again and again, in small moments that seem insignificant, to pause, to listen, to respond instead of react. Because every time you do that, even once, you are strengthening a different part of your mind. The part that leads. The part that sees clearly. The part that doesn't get pulled in every direction. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, didn't live a life of extreme power or status. He wasn't a ruler or a general. He was a merchant who lost everything in a shipwreck. And instead of collapsing, he found himself in a bookstore, reading Socrates, asking a simple but profound question. How do I live well? And his answer was surprisingly simple. Virtue is the only true good. Not status. Not wealth. Not approval. And virtue isn't built in one big moment. It's built in small ones. Repeated. Consistent. Almost invisible at first. And that's exactly what a Stoic morning is. It's not a performance. It's a beginning. A place where you practice, quietly, who you want to be before the world starts testing you. Because no matter what yesterday looked like, no matter how reactive you were, no matter what you regret, you get something incredibly powerful every single day. A reset. Every morning is a fresh start. And before moving on, take a moment and let this settle. Because everything we've talked about, every principle, every example, every practice, comes down to one simple truth. The quality of your life is shaped by the quality of your reactions, not by what happens to you, not by luck, not by other people, not by circumstances, but by what you do in that small space between the moment something happens and the moment you respond. That space is real, and most people never notice it. But once you do, once you learn to slow it down, to widen it, to step into it with awareness instead of impulse, you realize something powerful. You are not at the mercy of what happens. You are in charge of how you meet it. And that changes everything. Here on Stoicism Breath, this is the path. Not perfection, but presence. Not control of the world, but mastery of yourself. And it begins every single morning. And here's the truth most people don't realize. Calm isn't something you're born with. Clarity isn't reserved for a special kind of person. And peace isn't something the world gives you. It's something you practice. Because the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they weren't perfect. Not even close. Marcus struggled with anxiety while carrying the weight of an empire. Epictetus lived part of his life as a slave. Seneca made decisions he later questioned. These weren't flawless men. They were human. Complicated. Imperfect. Just like you. But every single morning, they returned to one simple question. What kind of person do I want to be today? Not, how do I control everything? Not, how do I make sure nothing goes wrong? Just that one question. And here's what's powerful. They didn't expect a perfect answer. They didn't expect to get it right every time. The practice wasn't in finding the answer. The practice was in asking the question again and again. Because every time you ask it, something shifts. You move from reacting to choosing. So tomorrow morning, before the noise rushes in, before your phone pulls you into someone else's world, before emails, headlines, and responsibilities start stacking up, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, what do I want to protect today? Maybe it's your patience. Maybe it's your energy. Maybe it's your peace in a situation that usually throws you off. Name it. Hold it. And then as the day unfolds, listen, not to everything, but to what actually matters. And respond from that place. That's it. That's the philosophy. That's the practice. That's what thousands of years of wisdom keeps pointing back to. Not complexity. Not perfection. Just awareness and choice. And if you're honest, you already knew this. Some part of you recognized it the moment this video started. This was just a reminder. If something in this spoke to you, something real, take a second right now and anchor it. Because ideas fade, but actions stay. Hit like so more people who need this can find it at the right moment. Leave a comment, What principle stayed with you the most? Or simply write this: I choose how I respond. Because someone else scrolling might need to read that today. Share this with someone who's been carrying too much lately. Someone who wakes up tense. Someone who reacts before they even realize it. And if you want to keep building this kind of life, steady, clear, intentional, subscribe to Stoicism Breath. This isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware, stronger, calmer, more in control of what truly matters. Thank you for being here. Now go. Build your morning and protect your peace.